Greetings, all. This is Rick Levine with your June astrology forecast, and I am recording this from Milan, Italy. And I'll be doing a weekend 2-day intensive chart reading workshop here in Milan this weekend. And if you're watching this in time and you're in the area, the link for that will be down below. We will be virtually broadcasting this, so you can attend this online. And for those who are watching this a bit later, I will be in Copenhagen next weekend. That will be June 6th through the 8th, for the all-time astrology conference. And that link will be down below also. I'll be doing a talk on quantum astrology. I'm excited about that because that is the home of Niels Bohr, one of the main movers and shakers in the development of quantum physics just over 100 years ago. And then I will be doing a 2-day hands-on natal chart interpretation workshop on June 10th through the 11th after that workshop. And again, link information is down below. Now, I have a couple of other events coming up, but before I get into them, I want to mention that every month for the forecast for the month ahead, we choose a chart at random from the people on my mailing list. If you're not on my email list, you can go to Rick Levine Astrologer, ricklevineastrologer.com, and sign up for the list. I promise I will not overload you with marketing stuff. You'll get an occasional email from me and notifications when I have something online. This month's winner is Brandy Tollison, and Brandy was number 3999. And my assistant Gail chooses these at random once a month from the list of those people who are on the email list. Brandy, we will be in touch with you via email to schedule your free Harmonics mini reading, and congratulations. Before I get into the material at hand, I just want to mention that the next astrology night will be on June 27th, Friday evening, June 27th. And that'll be happening technically a week early because the following weekend is a holiday in the US. That's Independence Day weekend. And so we will be doing astrology night on June 27th at 6:30 p.m. from Soul Food Coffee House. And you'll receive an announcement on that as we get closer to the event also. Coming up later in the year, I will be doing a keynote talk and an additional teaching at the Kepler College Symposium. That's September 5th through the 7th. And that's going to be in scenic Niagara Falls, New York. And you can find out more about that at the link. Again, all the links will be published below in the pinned comment, not in the description, but in the first comment that'll be pinned to the top. And that's at keplercollege.org, events.keplercollege.org, but the clickable link will be below. And then in mid-October, October 15th through the 19th, OPA, that's the Organization for Professional Astrology, they're holding a retreat in Park City, Utah. That's very, very beautiful up in the mountains outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, easily accessible from Salt Lake City. And the title of this weekend conference is The Cosmic Shift, Connecting in a New Era. And I will be doing a 3-day intensive teaching. In order to find out more about this conference, again, the link is in the first pinned comment below. But OPA conferences are a bit different because you register for a specific small group, small groups of about 8 to 10 people in a group for 3 days, doing deep dives on particular topics. And my topic is described in detail in the OPA retreat webpage that is clickable from below. And then the last event that I want to mention before we get into the material at hand is the fact that I will be back in Goa for a final initiation into astrology. And this will be on November 20th through December 2nd, this year, 2025. And as always, you can find the link below, but that's heavenandearthworkshops.com. And many of you know that I've been doing this retreat at the same place for several years now because it's such an ideal place, a short walk to a beautiful, magical, swimmable beach, great restaurants around. It's at an Ayurvedic healing spa where there's masseuses on staff and an Ayurvedic doctor on staff. And the restaurant is vegetarian, 2 meals a day are included, information and complete day-by-day curriculum is available at the link below. That's heavenandearthworkshops.com. This event typically does fill out. We limit it to about 25 or 30 people at the most, and we're getting up there in numbers. So if you're interested in that, check it out. And if you have any questions on that, send me an email. I'd be glad to talk with you if you have concerns or information about either India, Goa, the curriculum, or anything else. And with that, we will move into the chart interpretation for the month of June. I am recording this at about 3 p.m. on Friday, May 30th, here in Milan. That's 6 a.m. in Redmond, Washington, Pacific Daylight Time. And we do have the moon in the latter degrees of Cancer. And we are beginning to see that Aries pile up. And without any further ado, we're going to just go right into the chart for June 1st. We can see that by noon on June 1st, this is Sunday, June 1st, and again, all times are Pacific Daylight Time, even though I am in Milan. Um, the moon is at about 25, almost 26 degrees of Leo. We've just come through a moon conjuncting Mars, so we might have had a bit of a feisty morning or energetic from even late last night on through the morning. And we also have the moon making a trine with Venus, which could add a bit of sweetness. One thing I do want to note here is that Venus has just conjoined with Eris. This was exact late last night, early this morning, depending upon where you are on the planet. In Redmond, Washington, it was at 7:45, well, 7:42 a.m. And here is a sense of connection between what we like, what we want, what we value, Venus, and Eris's concern for bringing out things that do not fit into place. Now, I find it interesting that the moon has just moved through its conjunction with Mars and actually is emphasizing this Venus-Eris conjunction by trining it at noon today. And I think that that just adds a sense of power to the day, to June 1st, with this very, very intense moon in Leo. And we'll see what happens from there. Now, one of the things that I want to note before going on is the fact that um, Jupiter is squaring to Saturn. And here we can see that Saturn has moved into Aries. Now, Saturn is in Aries. Saturn moved into Aries on May 25th. It retrogrades back into Pisces on September 1st and then moves into Aries and stays there for the next couple of years. It moves back into Aries next February 13th. Now, I just want to mention this because we also have Neptune having just moved into Aries also. That would have been the end of March, another month and a half, no, almost 2 months back. But the thing that we want to note here is that Saturn and Neptune on the 1st of June are about 1 degree and 20 minutes apart. They're both in the same sign. We're feeling the power of this conjunction of Saturn's constraining and holding in the potential diffusion and vision and imagination of Neptune, while Neptune is allowing us to take the restrictions of Saturn and in some way envision a way of moving beyond them. It's going to take a while for this to perfect and for us to get a sense of what's really going on. But all through the month of June, Saturn, moving faster than Neptune, is catching up to Neptune, and it'll continue to do that until mid-July. Actually, the first week of July, Neptune turns retrograde, and Saturn is slowing down for its retrograde. Both Neptune and Saturn are moving slowly now because they're both turning retrograde in July. What's important to understand is that Neptune turns retrograde the first week of July, which means that Saturn is still moving forward, even very slowly. And so their conjunction is getting closer and closer and closer together. In fact, when Saturn turns retrograde mid-July, the two planets Saturn and Neptune will be less than a quarter of a degree apart. There'll be 13 minutes of orb. And in fact, they'll be within one quarter of a degree, within 15 minutes of orb from the end of the first week of July, around July 7th, 8th, all the way through July 24th, that Saturn and Neptune will be within a quarter of a degree of orb, meaning that we're going to be feeling this. But then, because they both turn retrograde, Saturn retrogrades faster than Neptune, the orbs begin to the orb begins to get greater. The energy diffuses. Both Saturn and Neptune move back into Pisces. They both turn direct. And then next February, both Saturn and Neptune move back into Aries, where on February 20th they will conjunct exactly. Now, this is basically a place where we should put a tack on our calendar for February 20th of 2026, knowing that what's going on these days in some ways will lead to and won't play through until that period of time. But that Saturn-Neptune conjunction is sitting behind everything that occurs now, including, and this is where I was going when I said a few minutes ago on the chart of June 1st, we should look at Jupiter making its square to Saturn and its square to Neptune. That Jupiter, Neptune, Jupiter square Neptune, and Jupiter square Saturn don't occur until later in the month. In fact, Jupiter squares Saturn on June 15th, and Jupiter squares Neptune on June 18th. But again, even here at the beginning of the month, that Jupiter Saturn square it's less than 2.5 degrees of orb, and it's getting closer and closer. And yet the interesting thing is that Jupiter will not be squaring Saturn and Neptune by sign until it moves into Cancer, and Jupiter enters Cancer on June 9th. Right now, we can see that Jupiter is at 28 degrees of Gemini and about 11 minutes of arc. So this Jupiter squaring Saturn and Neptune is quite significant because the Saturn-Neptune conjunction itself is significant. And we'll have more to say about that as the month progresses on, in this talk today. But it's interesting that everything this month will feel like Saturn happens first and then Neptune, meaning we'll get the hard news, we'll get the wall that restricts us from just going in the same direction that we'd been going. We get the authority saying, no, this can't happen this way, or the authority, Saturn, saying, this is the new rule. And then Neptune kind of may come in and fuzz it out a little bit, or at least give us a way to work within that structure that isn't as difficult as the first wave of Saturn might seem. And we'll get this theme again and again and again this month. But the largest wave of it is going to be Jupiter's square to Saturn, which is going to say, in some ways, that Jupiter-Saturn square says that we need to hold back, but Jupiter is basically encouraging us to have confidence, encouraging us to have hope or believe in ourselves. And yet Saturn is saying, but you still have to do the work to achieve the reward. And then the Jupiter squaring Neptune is basically emphasizing the dreamy, the imagination, and yet Saturn behind it is still saying we have to have discipline if we're going to make the dream come true. The Jupiter square Neptune part of this, and again, both of these are in play all month, back and forth. But the Jupiter square Neptune side of this is basically warning us that if we just rely on our imagination, if we just kind of go with what our thoughts or our dreams are, that we could get ourselves into trouble. There's a sense that Jupiter square Neptune is not a good sign to gamble under because we think that we're going to win, and odds yet still may be against us unless we do the hard work that we need to do. Since the moon is toward the end of Leo, we want to note that the moon will be moving from Leo into Virgo at 7, really just about 8 p.m. tonight, moments before 8 p.m. But we could just say at 8 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, the moon moves into Virgo. And that takes us to the chart of Monday, June 2nd, where we can see at noon the moon is at 8 degrees of Virgo. And there's no exact aspects that we need to talk about today, but just note that the Jupiter is inching along towards its change of sign into Cancer that we noted that we talked about a few minutes ago, and of course that occurs on June 8th. That it actually no, sorry, that actually occurs on June 9th when Jupiter actually enters Cancer. On the 3rd, we can see that the moon midday is at about 20 degrees of Virgo. And the significant aspect that we want to talk about today is the fact that Mercury is making a square and a half with Pluto. Now, normally this wouldn't be something that we would spend a lot of time on, and we're not going to, but this just shows a bit of a disruption between some deeper power struggle kind of perspective that may come out into the open. Mercury in Gemini, Mercury's moving quite fast now as it moves through Gemini. In fact, Mercury will move from Gemini into Cancer and even into Leo by the end of the month. Mercury is traveling pretty quickly. Mercury enters Cancer on June 8th, and it enters Leo on June 26th. So we have Mercury really kind of it's moving quickly. And often when planets move so quickly, they don't hold their energy as long. And so this Mercury square and a half to Pluto may not last that long, but often this is an acute energy. It brings something out into the open that was hidden. The exact perfection of this aspect occurs early this morning in Seattle at 6:17 a.m. So it may even be at play in the evening before we go to bed, and or when we wake up in the morning. On June 4th, we have the moon moving from Virgo into Libra, and it does that at 6:38 a.m. The moon at 2 degrees, almost 3 degrees of Libra, midday on June 4th, which may give us a bit of a reality check, a bumping into some situation that has us kind of at first having to pull our energy in. That's the moon opposing Saturn. But then as the theme continues, and again, this will be a theme all month, the moon will oppose Neptune, and so we can dream our way out of whatever the difficult situation might have been. Also, here on the 4th, we have Venus now making a sextile with Jupiter. We may have begun to feel that yesterday, but today it is exact by early evening. 7:30 p.m. is when Venus is exactly sextile to Jupiter. This is a feel-good aspect. This is an aspect where we have a sense of that we like something, we're getting the goodies. It may even be a little bit of a self-indulgence. I would note here, though, that Venus at 28 degrees of Aries and Jupiter at 28 degrees of Gemini, right smack at the middle point, at the midpoint, is Uranus at 28 degrees of Taurus. What this can indicate is some unexpected, sudden releasing of energy around those things that feel good or are nice. Quite frankly, this could be a sudden expenditure of money that you either didn't plan on or just something that you decide, what the heck, I really want this, I'm going to buy it. There's that sense of self-indulgence and maybe even a willingness to go outside of the restrictions that you might normally feel, understanding, however, that Jupiter is still pushing closer and closer day by day to its square with Saturn and to Neptune. That's here on June 4th. By the 5th, we can see that Mercury, who's been moving rather quickly, is now at the same degree as the nodes. Mercury at 23 Gemini, the nodes at 23 Pisces Virgo. And we have this moment where Mercury becomes extremely important, almost volatile. And yet the interesting thing here is that Mercury is making a sextile to Mars. And in fact, Mercury is moving from that sextile to Mars today to a sextile to Eris and Chiron, which have also recently conjoined, and it will be sextiling both of those on the 6th. That would be tomorrow. So what does this mean? This means that Mercury communication is in high force right now, and we're able to express ourselves and to assert ourselves because of Mercury's sextile to Mars. But we're doing it in a way that still can bring out some hidden stuff, some old wounds, some old hurts. The good news here is that the resolve of this will be Mercury not only making its sextile to Mars and then tomorrow to Eris and to Chiron, but by the 11th, Mercury will be sextiling Venus. And this is kind of the sweet talk that comes in and settles around all of the energy. And so we're kind of on this Venus Mercury run right now that culminates with Mercury sextiling Venus. Although today we have that Jupiter, actually it was exact yesterday, and that's the Jupiter sextile Venus or Venus sextile Jupiter. So this is a bit of sweetness of energy. And note here also that Mars is coming in to trine both Eris and Chiron. So as Mars comes into this trine with both Eris and Chiron, and that's exact on the ninth and 10th, it's almost like we have this energy to kind of really dig into things that are hidden, that need to be brought out into the open. That would be Eris, the disruption. And yet Jupiter and Mercury and even the Sun from Gemini are going to be mediators to this energy through much of the month. We'll kind of get into this a little bit more, but right now, today on June 5th, we can see how Mercury is making that sextile with Mars that will be followed up by its sextiles to Eris and Chiron. An interesting pattern to watch as it unfolds. Also note here that Jupiter is now at 29 Gemini, as if it's done with Gemini. It's not quite yet, of course, and ready to move into Cancer. That is on June 5th. On June 6th, we do have the moon moving from Libra into Scorpio, but that doesn't occur until 7:22 p.m. But we can see here at midday on Friday the 6th that the moon is still at 26 degrees of Libra. However, it will be moving into Scorpio later this evening. The other thing here on the 6th, and some of this we've already talked about, is that Mercury is making its sextiles to both Chiron and Eris, giving us that ability to say things that may be disruptive. That would be the Eris side of it, and yet ultimately can have a healing capability. We have to be aware, though, that our words can either hurt or heal, and that the conscious energy around that can be really important so that we don't hurt instead of healing. So this is really an important thing to stay aware of. As we move to the 7th, we can see that the moon is at 8 degrees of Scorpio. We can also see that Mars at 24, almost 25 degrees of Leo is coming into that trine I mentioned just a few minutes ago, coming into that trine with Eris and Chiron. One would imagine that this is actually going to be an expressive trine. Its trine being exact, Mars trine Eris exact on the 9th, and then exact Chiron, trine Chiron on the 10th. As we move to June 8th, we have a few things that we need to talk about. One of them is that Mercury, which is moving quite quickly right now, has caught up to Jupiter. Here at noon, you can still see it. This is on Sunday, June 8th. You can see that Mercury is still just 5 minutes of orb shy of its conjunction with Jupiter, and that Mercury conjunction to Jupiter occurs just an hour and 11 minutes after this chart. It occurs at 1:11 p.m. And again, that's Pacific Daylight Time. And now one can pick up on that energy of Mercury and Jupiter, the big idea, saying more. The Jupiter-Mercury conjunctions can be very positive, but again, it's almost like positive with a caveat. The caveat is that we can get so carried away with what we're saying that we exaggerate to the point of either misleading someone intentionally or unintentionally, or even telling a bit of a white lie or even a serious lie. Mercury, Jupiter tends towards, it's prone to exaggerate. It wants to make the molehill into a mountain. And the intriguing thing here, though, is that both Mercury and Jupiter are just moments or days, depending upon whether it's Mercury or Jupiter, away from making their exact squares to both Saturn and Neptune. So we're getting set up here for this Jupiter expression of words, Mercury, that is, really, we're feeling that today. And yet, by later in the day on the 8th, just a few hours later, by 4 p.m., it's 3:58 p.m. exactly, Mercury, moving so quickly, passes over Jupiter and enters Cancer, where we might go, whoops, said too much. You see, Gemini is talkative, Mercury at home in Gemini, with Jupiter and the Sun in Gemini. There's a lot of words that are being thrown around. When Mercury slips into Cancer at about 4 p.m. this afternoon, we may feel embarrassed by either what we've said or by what we've heard, the conversations we've been involved in. There's this tendency of wanting to become more sensitive and to maybe even become quieter. We want to use our words to protect ourselves rather than to connect with others. And this is a bit of a difference of energy. We even have Venus moving into a square with Pluto. That's not exact until tomorrow, the 9th. Actually, let's move the chart ahead to the 9th. And we can see that midday on the 9th, the moon has moved from Scorpio into Sagittarius. The moon moves into Sagittarius at or moved at 7:55 a.m. here on Monday, June 9th. But there's a bunch of things that are going on today that I think are quite significant here on the 9th. First of all, we can see that Mercury is now in Cancer, where it will be for most of the rest of the month. Um, uh, Mercury actually remains in Cancer, and it moves into Leo on the 26th. And so for most of the month, our words may be a little bit more hesitant, a little bit more emotionally centered, a little bit more self-protective, cautious than they were when they were just running around in any circle they wanted to connect in when Mercury was moving through Gemini. The other thing today, as Mercury is moving through the first degree of Aries, Mercury will make a square to Saturn first at um, at 4 a.m. That's early this morning, 3:48 a.m. Mercury squares Saturn. And then by almost 4 p.m. today on the 9th, Mercury will square Neptune. So we're getting a day of that instantaneous energy of hold it in, be cautious, be real, be fearful, think about what you're going to say, consider the words, consider the cause and effect. And then once it's processed, we then can dream our way into what's next. Mars is also quite active today because Mars is coming closer and closer to its trine to Chiron, having made its trine to Eris yesterday. Actually, it's making the trine to Eris today. We're still looking at the 9th. I jumped ahead to the 10th in my head. But Mars making the trine to Eris today there can be disruptive energy today. We can say and do things that are kind of causing a little more trouble than we intend. And then Mercury square to Saturn, it might be, uh-oh, we said too much, or maybe I shouldn't say that. And at the same time, today we also have Venus making the exact square to Pluto. I mentioned that yesterday also. That occurs at 10:20 a.m. It's perfected, but we'll be feeling it all day. And in some ways, this is about going into the underworld. This is about Persephone being abducted by Pluto, about rescuing Persephone from the underworld. This is about the hero's journey. On top of that, today at 2 in the afternoon, we also have, it's actually technically at 2:02 p.m., we have Jupiter changing signs as it does once every year. Sometimes it'll do a direct retrograde direct, making it a little bit more often than just a year. But Jupiter has been in Gemini for pretty much the last year. And now, as it moves into Cancer, Jupiter in traditional astrology is exalted in Cancer. It likes being there when it's not in its home sign of Sagittarius or Pisces. There's a sense of Jupiter in Cancer of the feeling good about being at home, being with family, being in a community that's not an open not an open Aquarius-like community, but one that's more contained, that's like within the home and the family. And there's a bit of self-protectionism. And now, since we have not only Mercury, but Jupiter, also Jupiter and Mercury in Cancer, by the end of the month, we'll have the sun there also. But right now, on June 9th, we have the Mars trining Eris moving into the trine with Chiron early tomorrow morning. We have the Mercury making the square to Saturn, following up with the square to Neptune later in the day. The square to Saturn is at about 4 a.m. and the square to Neptune is at about 4 p.m. So those squares are almost 12 hours apart. On top of that, the Venus square Pluto. This is quite an active day. And then as we move, and of course the moons move into Sagittarius that I already mentioned, but this is about an uplifting energy, which like we're going down, but into some dark and deep and intense places. But at the same time, there's a portion that is our souls are being uplifted. We're ready to put the hope and the faith into some action, into the future. We're ready to do it. We're ready to go somewhere. And here, as we look at the 10th, we can see June 10th, we can see that on Tuesday, midday, the moon is at 14 Sagittarius. And we also have now Mars making its perfected trine to Chiron. That's early this morning. We have Mercury making a quincunx, an exact quincunx with Pluto. And this again is about the discomfort of going down and going deep. Mercury in Cancer doesn't say everything that it wants to or needs to say, and that it's quincunx Pluto in Aquarius. It's almost like we have things that we want to say, but we can't quite muster up either the courage or the rationalization or the energy. There's something here that is preventing us from saying what we need to say. And if we do say it, there's a part of us that'll wish we hadn't because it may not go the way we expected it to, or the way that we wished that it would. Now, we're also coming into the full moon. You can see that the moon in Sagittarius is the sign opposite the sun in Gemini, and the actual full moon itself occurs. The actual full moon itself occurs just after midnight on June 11th. And here we are looking at that chart for 12:43 a.m. Pacific time, with both the sun and the moon at 20 degrees and 39 minutes. The Sagittarius moon is uplifting and expansive and dreams of travel, whereas the Gemini sun is more comfortable just connecting whatever the dots are that are close by, nearby. And I think that this is an interesting and significant full moon, because it's setting up some important things that will become obvious as time goes on. One of those things is the fact that we are still dealing with Mercury. Mercury sextiles. Now Mercury is sextiling Venus. That goes back to what we talked about earlier about the Mercury first sextiling Mars and then Eris and Chiron, and now it's sextiling Venus. That's not exact until tomorrow. But we also have the moon coming into a grand trine with Mars and Eris and Chiron. We can see here that it's still about 5 degrees away, the moon at 20, and the Eris, Chiron, and Mars are at 25 and 26. But that's basically 10 hours away on a full moon chart. This is certainly part of the chart that I would want to consider. The other thing here is on the 10th, we still have that Mercury quincunx Pluto, which is making us unsure that this is actually, I mean, this is left over from last night, but we're unsure that what we're saying is the right thing to say. We also have here the sun coming into a square with the nodal axis. It'll take us a day or two to get there, But mostly, I think that the theme of this particular full moon is the awareness of what we're holding in, the awareness of what we're not saying. Mercury is already past its squares to Jupiter. I'm sorry, Mercury is already past its squares to both Saturn and Neptune, but Jupiter is still coming into those squares. And so we're still concerned with this dance, with this what's the, it's almost like we're yielding a double-edged sword, and one side of it is the caution and the stability and the certainty of Saturn, and the other side of it is the illusions, the dreams, and the hope, the faith even of Neptune. And with Mercury having just made those squares, we still have Jupiter coming into them over the days ahead. That I think is going to be a theme of how this Sagittarius bigger, better, more expansive full moon plays out. Now, here at noon on June 12th, we can see that the moon is at 8, almost 9 degrees of Capricorn. And in fact, the moon entered Capricorn yesterday afternoon at 6:54, at almost 7 p.m. last night, yesterday evening. That would have been on Wednesday, the 11th. But here on the 12th, we can see that the moon is well into Capricorn. And we also have here on the 12th, we have Jupiter now coming in even closer to its square to Saturn. The Jupiter-Saturn square is now 1/2 a degree from being exact. It's 30 minutes of orb Jupiter at 0 degrees 40, and Saturn at 1 degree 10. That's like yeah, 30 minutes. It's a 1/2 a degree. So we're feeling this cultural social squeeze. And although this is exact in a few days, the Jupiter Saturn square is exact on the 15th. I'm going to say a few words about it now because it's so important over even the last days, weeks, and certainly up through the 15th when it perfects, and then it'll still be exact, or it'll still be in play for days after that. But once it moves through its perfection um, on the 15th, I think we're going to begin feeling coming in right behind it, even though we still might be feeling it already. We're going to feel it stronger, and that's Jupiter square to Neptune. So the thing about the Jupiter-Saturn cycle is that this is a 20-year cultural expansion contraction cycle. I've said this many times in these forecasts over the years that Jupiter and Saturn kind of function like a cultural new moon, full moon. That we know the lunar cycle from new moon to full moon is like 2 weeks, and that every 28 days or 29 days, the moon catches back up with the sun, and that creates close to what we call a moon or a moonth. Well, Jupiter lines up with Saturn every 20 years like clockwork. And Jupiter and Saturn typically align on the even numbered decades. So they aligned within a year of 1900, 1920, 1940, 1960, 1980, 2000. They actually aligned early in 2001. And then in 2020, and they'll align again, they'll conjoin again in 2040. Well, on the odd numbered decades, the 1910, 30, 50, 70, 90, 2010, and 2030, they'll be halfway through that cycle, and they'll kind of be at their full moon stage, meaning that Jupiter will be opposed to Saturn. Halfway through each of these conjunctions to oppositions, oppositions to conjunctions, around the years ending in 5. So roughly, we can go back to 2005, 2015, 2025, 2035. They'll be either in an opening, they meaning Jupiter and Saturn, will either be in an opening square or a closing square. The opening squares occur 5 years after the conjunctions. There was a great conjunction, and I'll come back to why it was a great conjunction. There was a great conjunction in December of 2000. Jupiter conjoined with Saturn. But Jupiter conjoins with Saturn in a cycle that changes elements every 400 years or so. That this Jupiter-Saturn cycle, this conjunction cycle, moved from Earth to air. And when it changes from one element to another, that first conjunction is the one that establishes the new part of the cycle, is called a great conjunction. We had a great conjunction in December of 2020, and now we are getting the square from Jupiter to Saturn, saying those things that began, those seeds that were planted culturally, socially, politically, economically, those seeds that were planted at the end of 2020 on into 2021 are now reaching a point where we say, how much have they grown? How fast have they grown? That would be Jupiter. How strong are they? How stable are they? That would be Saturn. What do we need to do to establish the rhythm so that they, in 5 more years, can come to fruition without basically losing the seedling before it matures? And so, this period of time of Jupiter squaring Saturn, that actually is a slow moving aspect that has occurred 3 times. And when I say 3 times, I mean within one particular cycle because of the direct, retrograde, direct. Jupiter squared Saturn last summer on August 19th. So by midsummer last year, we were feeling the first waves of big, more, expand, potential, possibility. Saturn, no, not so fast. Pull it in. This is serious. Go back to where you were. Jupiter, yes. Saturn, no. Jupiter, big and blue, open sky, liberal, democratic, if you want to say, politically in the United States. Saturn, kind of authoritative, repressive, for a reason of stabilizing and maybe even Republican. And again, there's not a one-to-one connection that's exact, but the larger philosophical frameworks really do work in as much as we're seeing that this process, which culminated last year in the presidential election, we had Jupiter squaring Saturn by the peak of midsummer toward the middle of August. And then the retrograde repetition of this Jupiter square Saturn occurred on Christmas Eve, right at the end of the year. New president was elected. We're dealing with the changes in the political structure, in the cultural structure. And now on June 15th, I know we're still looking at the chart of June 12th, but this is that important that just even days before, we're feeling this getting closer and closer as Jupiter on June 15th is within a half a degree of exactly squaring Saturn for the third and final time. Now, let's come back to the chart on June 12th, and we can see that the moon, having moved into Capricorn, is emphasizing the Saturnian side of this equation. We're maybe feeling the weight of the energy. Let's move this ahead now to the 13th. And on the 13th, we can see that the sun at 23 degrees of Gemini is at the same degree. Well, it's interesting because the sun moved from 22 to 23 degrees. And as it did earlier this morning, the sun made an exact square to the nodal axis. The sun's square to the nodal axis would have been at about 3 a.m. And again, this emphasizes the sun as a motivating factor, as an anxiety producing, as an engaging energy. The sun in Gemini wanting to communicate, wanting to make connections, but I think it's a bit overwhelmed by the energy of the planets in Saturn saying restrain, especially since Jupiter is coming to that square with Saturn, and because the moon is in Saturn's sign in Capricorn. I think all of this is important to what's going on as we move to the 14th. The moon moves into from Capricorn into Aquarius. Remember, in ancient astrology, traditional astrology, Saturn was also a ruler, was the ruler, or at home in both Capricorn and Aquarius. But the moon actually moves into Aquarius at 3:50, let's just say 4 a.m., just moments before 4 a.m. on Saturday, June 14th. And then as it moves into Aquarius by midday, the moon by midday is actually joining up with Pluto. Here's a bit of intensity here on the 14th. And the moon in Aquarius is kind of giving us that alternative perspective of Saturn containment and Uranus, because the modern ruler of Aquarius is Uranus, and that's breakthrough. And we're getting some of that Uranian energy because Mars is coming into an exact square with Uranus. That's not exact until tomorrow, the 15th. Let's go there. There's the 15th. And on the 15th, we can see that at about 2:45 a.m., 2:46 a.m. Pacific time, Mars made an exact square with Uranus. This can be explosive. This can be energetic. This is expressive. And at the same time, we now see that the Saturn square, the Jupiter square to Saturn is exact. That's exact at 7:36 this morning. And you can see even at noon, it's just 1/30th of a degree from being exact. It is so close right now. And both of these squares, the Mars square Uranus, express it, explode it, bring it out into the open, take a risk, do it. And the Jupiter square Saturn, the whoa, don't do it so much, don't do it so fast, don't do it so hard, that this is an incredibly dynamic day. And I expect that we'll see some things pop today. We also have the moon moving through Aquarius. And by the time we get to Monday, the 16th, we have the moon having just moved into Pisces. The moon enters Pisces at 11 a.m. on June 16th, so that we can see here at noon on June 16th, the moon is still at 0 degrees, just a half a degree into Pisces. But this does change the flavor a bit. And the flavor that we're getting here on the 16th is tempered by the fact that the sun is now coming into sextiles with Eris and Chiron. I talked about this at the very beginning when we had first Mercury making its sextiles. And then I said that would be followed up by the sun doing the same thing. Well, this is, although the sun sextile Eris is exact today at 5:36 a.m., and it's sextile Chiron exact tomorrow just after midnight, so very, very late tonight in many places. This is a bit of a soothing energy, but we can't say it's too soothing, because we're still in the midst of this Jupiter squaring Saturn today, or exact yesterday, but even today, it's still less than 1/4 of a degree orb. And the Jupiter is now coming into squaring Neptune, which will be exact on the 18th. So just in a couple of days, on Wednesday, that square will be exact. So this is an incredibly dynamic period of time here on the 16th. We also have on the 16th Mercury making a half square with Uranus, which is again another piece of the Uranian influence. Remember, Mars squared Uranus yesterday. Mercury makes a half square with Uranus today, but Mercury is also making a half square with Mars. So Mercury comes right into that halfway point between the Mars-Uranus square. Mars-Uranus square, again, is expressive, is an enormous amount of energy, and it can make self-restraint rather important because carelessness, can allow us to do too much too fast. Um, and on top of that, with the Mercury half square in between, this may end up being feelings of anger not expressed or resentment if we're holding it in. That Mercury half square to Mars on one side and half square to the Uranus on the other side. But it's Mercury in Cancer. It's I'd rather get even than get mad. It's passive aggressive. It's I'll protect myself, but I'm not going to come out and get you unless you absolutely provoke me. So there's a bit of restrained energy here, but also I think, a deeper possibility of healing with the sun sextile to Eris and Chiron. That's all on the 16th. By the 17th, midday, the moon is moved to mid Pisces. And we're getting that moon kind of making trines with the Cancer energy. It was trining Jupiter yesterday and trining Mercury today on the 17th. But we also have now the sun making its exact sextile with Chiron that I already mentioned. And the other thing that's of importance, since Mars was squaring Uranus at 29 degrees of Leo to 29 degrees of Taurus. By today, the 17th, Mars has left Leo, where it's been forever because it was doing that retrograde back there. And now Mars is in Virgo. Mars entered Virgo at 1:35 a.m., just after midnight this morning, and Mars is now in Virgo. Mars doesn't like being in Virgo particularly. It's still getting the square to Uranus. That's not going away just because Mars has changed signs. But Mars is a little bit less prone to do something just for the cause, just for the effect, just for the show, as it might have done in Leo. It doesn't quite have as much staying power of wanting to follow through. In Virgo, Mars becomes a bit more timid. It becomes a bit more concerned with doing what's right rather than doing something in the moment. This is all very important, but also look at that Jupiter squaring Neptune, which is now just nearly 1/4 of a degree of orb. Remember, it's exact tomorrow. So we're still feeling this push pull, this expand contract, this go for it, don't go for it, this kind of be conservative Saturn, respect or deal with authority Saturn. Jupiter kind of just figure out a way to run around the end of it. Jupiter square Neptune. The authority doesn't matter. I can make up my own rules and my own laws. I mean, this is kind of a difficult and crazy period of time that may have some lasting ramifications. But the energy is beginning to shift here, especially with Mars now moved by the 17th into Virgo. We also have here on the 17th the Sun making a half square with Venus, and the Venus half square to the Sun is the most difficult of the Venus aspects to the Sun, because Venus can only conjoin the Sun or sextile it or half square, that's 45 degrees, because then Venus begins to build up speed and catch back up to the Sun. So we're seeing that Venus half square Sun right now, which may just be a little bit annoying. There's this kind of thing creeping in that our our values, what we love, the Venus wanting the stability in Taurus, and yet the Sun in Gemini is still bouncing around. We don't have the stability that we would like, or that we wish we would or could have. As we move to the 18th, by 4 p.m. this afternoon, it's actually 4:08 p.m. The moon moves from Pisces into Aries. This is on Wednesday, June 18th. And June 18th, of course, is another big day because that's the perfection of the Jupiter square to Neptune, which is a hard thing to feel in the moment because Jupiter makes things bigger, it expands, it takes the boundaries and it moves them on us, makes them larger. It's like a magnifying glass. And Neptune, the boundaries are invisible or non-existent. And so when Jupiter squares Neptune, maybe nothing is going to happen specifically, but there can just be this feeling of having bought into an illusion or something being bigger or more expansive than it is in reality. It seems that way. This is a good day to pull in our energy and focus on what's real. And it's not like we won't have a choice, double negative intended there. We don't really have a choice because we're also coming into Mars making a quincunx with Saturn. That's not exact until tomorrow. Let's move the chart to the 19th. Now we can see that the moon is in Aries, midday on the 19th. The moon, as it moved into Aries yesterday afternoon, also joined up with Saturn and Neptune later in the afternoon, giving us another microcosmic blip of that pull in, get real, run into a boundary, Saturn, and then the dream our way around it, Neptune. But now we have a different thing playing into it. We have that quincunx from Mars also playing in there. And that quincunx from Mars, that's exact at 5:08 p.m. On Thursday, June 19th, kind of gives us this annoying, it's a feeling like we're not going to be able to get it right. It's a feeling like no matter what we do, it's not going to work out. Although it probably will, it just doesn't feel right in the moment, especially because we have Jupiter still kind of in the picture with the sun at the last, now coming into the last day of Gemini. The sun is coming in to catch up with Jupiter, and Jupiter is now making that square with Neptune, which was already exact yesterday on the 18th. But then it's going to be sextiled by Mars. Mars will make that sextile on the 22nd. And so we have this little triangle between Mars, Saturn, Neptune, and the Sun and Jupiter, which is showing us this pattern that's going to last because Mars is quincunx to Saturn today will be Mars's quincunx to Neptune tomorrow. And as the Jupiter and Sun come through that sextile and square points, we're going to feel like everything's great, everything's going to work out, nothing is great, nothing is going to work out, all at the same time. And obviously, this energy will shift. It is dynamic, and that shift will actually begin to process through by the 20th when the sun moves from Gemini into Cancer, which is the summer solstice in the north, the winter solstice down under. And the sun actually enters the sign of Cancer at 7:42 p.m. So you can see here at noon, the sun is still at 29 degrees Cancer, at 29 degrees Gemini and 42 minutes. The sun is still at 29 and about 3/4 of a degree of Gemini. But that sun will move into Cancer. And of course, it's the sun's ingress or entry into Cancer that creates what we call the summer solstice. This is the point in the northern hemisphere where the sun reaches the highest point in the sky at noon. It's the day or right around the days of the longest light as the North Pole is pointing toward the sun, more toward the sun than it does at other times of the year. If you're above the Arctic Circle, the sun does not go down. It does not ever reach the horizon. June 20th is that solstice, but we also have Mars making its exact quincunx to Neptune. Again, kind of just reminding us that even when we can envision the future, that would be Neptune, we still can't envision it. We can't crystallize it. We can't make it real. Venus at the half square now to Saturn. Before, Venus was at a half square to the sun. The sun is moving into its square to Saturn and Neptune, with Venus at the midpoint. We're not feeling our best right here. We're feeling lost. We're feeling alone. We may feel just like separated from the yumminess that we were having when we had the Venus sextiling Jupiter and the sun. Now that half square is coming in on both sides from Saturn and Neptune on one side, and the sun and Jupiter on the other side. This is June 20th, but Venus the exact Venus semi-square, half-square Saturn is on the 21st. Let's move that to the 21st. Oh, incidentally, we also have the moon moving out of Aries and into Taurus on the 20th. And that occurs at just before 7 p.m. on the 20th, 7:52 p.m. Seattle time. The moon moving into Taurus, giving us a little bit more solidity. It's reality. We're getting the Saturnian energy in a number of different ways, but it's also coming in with Venus making that half square to Saturn. This is the reality, Saturn, and we don't necessarily like it because Venus is making that half square. And Venus's half square to Saturn is exact on the 21st at 11:15 p.m. So it's late at night, just before the 22nd. Let's move to the 22nd. On the 22nd, we can see that now Venus is moved past the half square to Saturn and is now half square to Neptune, which is exact at noon. It's pretty much exact at noon today, on Sunday, the 22nd. But as good as this should feel, it doesn't, because we're a bit disillusioned. We're getting that Saturn reality check, and yet it's Venus half square to Neptune. The reality isn't the way we want it. It's not working out the way we want it to, and it may be a bit of a struggle here, especially because the sun is making its square to Saturn. And so we're getting the sun not only squaring Saturn, but it's also squaring Neptune, or at least it's coming up to that, because right now Saturn and Neptune are nearly almost a half a degree apart, just slightly over a half a degree apart. So we have the square between the sun and Saturn exact at 11:35 a.m. on the 22nd, and then the sun exactly square Neptune at 1:28 a.m. on the 23rd. That's late tonight or early tomorrow morning. So again, we're getting another round of this reality dream, or disillusionment, because Neptune and Saturn together can certainly create that energy here on the 22nd. We're also, though, getting today an uplifting energy from Mars sextiling Jupiter. And Mars sextiling Jupiter are happening close enough that they're both quincunxing Pluto. We talked a little bit about the Mars quincunx Pluto, but we have Jupiter now coming into that same aspect and the Sun after that. And so we have what we can call a yod or finger of God, where we have the base of this kind of pointer of Mars and the Sun Jupiter, and they are both moving either exactly already as the Mars is, or moving toward exact as the Jupiter and Sun are, making their quincunxes to Pluto. Mars makes its exact quincunx to Pluto at 9:59 p.m. tonight, and Jupiter makes its exact quincunx tomorrow night, and then the Sun makes its exact quincunx on the night of the 24th. So we're getting this kind of annoying, in some ways, this is suggesting all the parts of the Pluto and Aquarius, the collective, the community, the future, that are not necessarily working the way in which we theoretically would like them to work. There's a bit of kind of like annoyance around all of the stuff that's just not happening in the way we want it to. Also, on the evening of the 22nd, the moon moves from Taurus into Gemini, and that can lighten the energy a bit. It's interesting that as this month started, we had a whole pile up of planets and then a new moon in Gemini, and now we have the Sun and Jupiter and Mercury all in Cancer, and the only thing left in Gemini, basically yesterday, today, and tomorrow, is the moon kind of sweeping through Gemini. And on the evening of the 22nd, at 7:57 p.m., the moon moves into Gemini, and that is on the 22nd. By noon on the 23rd, we can see that the moon is at almost 10 degrees of Gemini. We can also see that Jupiter is partile quincunx to Pluto. That means they're both at the same degree. In fact, we have Mars and Jupiter and Pluto, all 3 degrees of their respective signs. The Sun at 2.5 degrees will be at that 3 degree point tomorrow. This is June 23rd. We also have today the Sun making its exact square with Neptune after having made its square with Saturn yesterday. That's today on the 23rd. We also have Mercury making a square with Chiron. What we say may not have the healing that we wish it to say, or we might just slip and say things that hurt rather than heal. Or we might have a thinking process, since this is Mercury in Cancer, that is kind of really deeply replaying some old hurts and wounds that we have nowhere to go with. We can't get it out into the open. We can't express it. Not a particularly comfortable day, although we're still getting a little bit of a buzz from the Mars and Sun sextiling. I'm sorry, the Jupiter and Sun still sextiling Mars, the Sun Jupiter sextiling Mars, although they still have to deal with the deeper energy of Pluto. That is all cooking today on the 23rd. As we move to the 24th, we have a couple of things of importance. I think I mentioned the Mercury square Chiron yesterday, but it was actually exact just moments at 12:15 a.m. today on the 24th. But we were certainly feeling it all day yesterday. And today the Sun moves into that quincunx position to Pluto. And after today, I think that yod, that energy of the discomfort of Pluto, will begin to play down. But we have today also the Sun conjoining Jupiter. Now, I think in some ways this may overpower whatever else we have going on. When the Sun joins up with Jupiter, these are the two largest things in the solar system. and it's like this is a bigger, better, more. They are quincunxing Pluto. And so there's a deeper thing that they're having to deal with. But there's something here that is giving us hope and optimism. And maybe it's just too much on some level. Things are getting out of hand. Okay, some people would say things have been getting out of hand for years or already out of hand. All of that might be true, but we'll see how that Jupiter-Sun plays out today, because there can be an optimism and enthusiasm. It's like we don't know when enough is. We just keep pushing things more and more and more. Um, and we're also notice here that the moon at 24 degrees of Gemini, it's going to change signs and move into Cancer. And we're going to have our first new moon of the summer. And that new moon is going to be on the 25th, on tomorrow at 3:31 a.m. This new moon is an incredibly potent new moon for a number of reasons. First of all, the new moon is conjoined Jupiter. It's technically just past it. I mean, we're talking like what, like less than a half a degree, a little bit over a half a degree past it. But we're getting that power, the expansive, the big, the confidence, the joy, the largesse, the magnanimity, good word, of Jupiter, Sun, and Moon. And this is not a culmination, this is a seed. And yet this seed is being planted in a way that still has to contend with the Mars in Virgo that's saying you can't just helter-skelter grow things out of control. You have to maintain them. You have to prune. You have to be careful enough that things don't grow wild. And at the same time, this new moon is also quincunxing to Pluto, which is again suggesting that somehow the energy of wanting to hold things in and take care of ourselves and our family and our home and domestic issues, that somehow that's at odds with the bigger picture of the Pluto and Aquarius. It's almost like things can be going to crap out there in the bigger world, even though we seem to have maintained some semblance of love or sanity or something on the home front. Complicated few days. And I think in this new moon, more than anything, we need to remember to plant the seeds, to sow the seeds of care. What do I mean by care? It's not just love. It's a maternal love. It's a Cancerian love that basically safeguards those that it loves, but doesn't do it in a way that's so overprotective that they can't grow on their own. The danger of too much Cancerian love is that it can be overprotective, and overprotective is not love. And I think that's where the benefits of the sextile to Mars comes in, even though Mars in Virgo is still a bit tentative. It's still practical and wants to be effective, and it wants to be efficient. I think all of these are important aspects, and I really believe that we have potential here for doing the right thing if we control our expression, but not over control. Too much control now, I think, can be dangerous. We're also moving into Mercury making a sextile with Uranus. That's exact tomorrow on the 26th. Let's go there. And we can see on the 26th, we now have several things cooking today. We have Mercury making a sextile with Uranus, which says that we get to say things in a way that is freeing. But note that Mercury and Uranus are still they're at the last degree of each of their signs. And a lot of this month and a lot of these last few months have been about the ending and the beginnings of things. And we're getting that again. We got that as Jupiter and the sun were moving from 29 degrees of Gemini into 0 degrees of Cancer. And we're getting it now again as Mercury at 29 degrees of Cancer is making an expressive sextile with Jupiter at 29 degrees of Taurus. But remember, I'm sorry, with Uranus at 29 degrees of Taurus. But remember that Uranus is moving into Gemini in just a couple of weeks. It does it on July 7. And Uranus, as it moves into Gemini, is going to stir up a lot of energy. We're on a roll now. This summer is unfolding, and the things are really moving along. But when you're in motion, even though things are moving, it may feel like they're not moving fast enough because remember, Saturn and Neptune have both slowed down, even though they've broken ground and are in Aries. They're both turning retrograde in the next few weeks. Neptune first, the first week of July, and then Saturn mid-July. And now we have Uranus at that last degree of Taurus, also changing signs, moving into Gemini. And it feels like things are shifting, but it's hard to tell what to do and how much energy to apply to it. And yet today, with the Mercury in Cancer, sextiling Uranus, I feel like there's a breakthrough. And as that Mercury moves into Leo, and it does that today just afternoon at 12:09 p.m. This may be the moment at which we really express ourselves. We're also getting the sun sextiling Mars today. That's after the Jupiter-Mars sextile. The sun catches up to that sextile today. So we have physical energy. There are things going on. And as Mercury moves from Cancer into Leo, it's almost like we're done holding it in. We're done. It's almost like no more Mr. Nice Guy. Oh, yeah, Mercury in Leo still wants to be nice, still wants to be loved, but whatever it needs to say now, it's going to say it. And that is here on the 26th. Um, as we get to the 27th, we see that the moon has moved into Leo, and the moon actually changes signs and enters Leo at 11:05 p.m. late in the day on the 26th. So by here on the 27th, we can see that it's already caught up with Mercury. It did that very early in the day today, and now it's at 7 degrees of Leo, but we're getting the fiery energy here. There's no question about it. This is like, it's almost like the month is going out with a bang, even though there's been a whole lot of holding in with the Cancerian energy. It's like with Mercury and the moon both shifting into Leo now, there's energy that needs to express. This is on the 27th. We also have Mercury as it moves into Leo. It's going to repeat that same damn thing with Saturn and Neptune. Mercury makes the trine with Saturn at 8 p.m. tonight on the 27th. And then as we move to the 28th, well, it already beyond that, but early on the 28th by 5 a.m., Mercury will make the trine to Neptune. Staying here on the 27th just for a bit, we can see that as the moon moved into Leo, it made those trines with Saturn and Neptune. And now, as Mercury does the same thing slower, it will first meet the trine to Saturn. Be serious. Say what you need to, but do it with caution. Do it with authority. And then, as it moves into the trine with Neptune by 5 a.m. tomorrow morning on the 28th, it's like once we establish our authority, this is what it is. Once we establish our authority with the Mercury trining Saturn, we can then dream. We can then open up the edges a little bit more. We can expand beyond and go out further and further and further. And I think that we will do that. Here's the chart for the 28th. The moon now has moved through toward the middle of Leo. It's at almost 21 degrees of Leo by the 28th. We can also see now the Mercury trining Neptune, having trined Saturn yesterday and trining Neptune early this morning here on the 28th. As we move to the 29th, we can see that the moon has moved into Virgo. The moon enters Virgo at 4:43 a.m. on Sunday morning, the 29th. And I think this also is pulling us into reality a bit more. Here at noon, the moon is almost at 4 degrees of Virgo. But that means that in about 3 hours, let's say at about 3 degrees, about 6 hours, by about 5 or 6 p.m. here on Sunday, June 29th, the moon will be joining up with Mars in Virgo. But rather than just getting angry, I think we're doing it in a way that is cautious and expansive at the same time, because the moon, as it's moving toward the conjunction with Mars, on the way is picking up its sextile to Jupiter that Mars and Jupiter did over the last few days. That Mars sextile Jupiter was back on the 22nd. And so we're still getting a bit of optimism here. But here on the 29th, we're getting another thing that is of importance, and that is that Mercury, having moved into Leo, is now opposing Pluto. And remember, these oppositions to Pluto have not gone down easily in the past, whether it was Mars's oppositions to Pluto, which go back to the presidential election and even Inauguration Day in the United States. Mercury opposed Pluto. Again, this is a power play, a power struggle. Saturn and Neptune here are at an important point because they're within a degree or so of being at that release point, the point of Thales, that is sextile one side of an opposition. That's they're both sextiling the Pluto side, and they're both trining the Mercury side. There's energy is moving here, but the month goes out, there's some stuff that is now coming out into the open again. It just feels like this has been a continuing theme this year. But there's some real struggle going on, and it may take a while for us to see where that struggle leads. But that Mercury opposed Pluto, we'll have more to say on that when I do the mid-month update here toward the middle of June. By the 30th, we can see that the moon has moved to mid-degrees of Virgo, but there's really no additional activity here going on. We can see that Uranus is just about ready to move into Gemini, which it will do next week by July 7th. And other than that, it's a month. This month is a little bit more disjointed than other months, but it's almost like we have our feet in new territory. We're trying to figure out our way. There's a lot going on, but the things that are going on are almost like a lot of leaps of imagination that are then met with reality, or maybe it's the other way around. There's a lot of reality that then is being met by leaps of imagination. And I'm going to end this month by just reminding us that the Saturn-Neptune conjunction by the end of the month it was just about 1/3 of a degree from becoming exact. By the middle of July, it will be less than 1/4 of a degree. And yet it's going to take until next January, February, March, even on into April for us to really understand what happened here with this Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So that's it for now. Stay safe. Do what you need to do out there, but remember that it's going to be a long haul. There's a lot going on this month, but I don't think that it is singularly as difficult as March or April was, but it's certainly not without its pressure. And the pressure here, I think, is a pressure to grow and not just fall into the illusion that if I take care of myself inside my home, inside the walls of my home, family, and friends, that would be the energy of Jupiter and the Sun, and even Mercury moving into or through Cancer. That's not going to solve the larger issues. We still have to keep a balance. We have to keep an ear to what's going on out in the greater world, and we have to be ready to make our actions seen when the time is right. That's it for now. I'm Rick Levine. Think cosmically, act locally, and I'll see you next month.